If I gave you a choice between securing your network or securing your identities, which one would you choose? 10 years ago, that question would have been easy, right? Most organizations would have chosen the network. Firewalls, perimeter security, VPNs, network segmentation. Traditional security models assumed that if someone was inside the network, they were probably trusted. But the world has changed. Users work from home. Applications live in the cloud. Partners need to access, to their systems. Mobile devices connect from anywhere, don't they? And attackers no longer spend all their time trying to break through firewalls. They often just try to steal identities now instead. Which brings me to something I tell almost every customer. Your Azure environment is only as secure as your identity strategy. You can build the best landing zone in the world, right? You can have excellent networking. You can have strong governance. But if attackers gain access to privileged identities, many of those controls become significantly less effective. That's why today we're focusing on Microsoft Entra and identity architecture. Because when I design Azure environments for customers, identity is usually one of the first things I think about. Not because identity is exciting, and not because it makes beautiful architecture diagrams, but because identity impacts everything else: security, governance, administration, operations, compliance, and ultimately risk. In this episode, we're going to look at how a consultant actually approaches identity architecture, the mistakes I've seen organizations and that make repeatedly, and how to build an identity foundation that supports both security and productivity. And of course, we're going to finish off with another Consultant Copilot Corner. And again, see how AI is going to help us review and improve our identity design. In the previous episode, we designed the foundation for our Azure environment for our client, right? We talked about landing zones. We talked about governance. We talked about structure. We also talked about preparing an Azure platform that could support future growth. One theme kept appearing throughout that sort of conversation, and it was identity. Who got access? Who can make changes? Who is allowed to administer resources? And who approves those permissions as well? All with that kind of accumulated into how do we reduce risk. Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework, or CAF, identifies identity as one of the sort of foundational capabilities that should be established early because things like governance, security, and operational controls all depend on it. And that's exactly why identity is our next step. Before we start deploying workloads, we need confidence that the right people will have the right access, and more importantly, at the right time. Let me start with one of the biggest mistakes I've seen, right? The customer creates an Azure environment. A few administrators need access. Someone gives them contributor access. Then another person needs access. Then another, and it just keeps on going. Eventually, people stop asking what level of access someone actually needs and just starts handing out permissions based on convenience. Months later, nobody knows who has what access, right? Or what do they have access to. Nobody knows why some permissions are actually granted. Everyone's actually afraid to remove access because they're actually worried something might break. At that point, the organization's lost control of its identity model. The scary thing is that the situation is incredibly common, right? Not because people are careless, because identity planning is often delayed until after workloads start arriving. The problem is that permissions are much easier to define before an environment grows and after it becomes complicated. This is why consultants spend time thinking about identity early. Good identity architecture reduces future complexity, but bad identity architecture creates future complexity. One of the biggest shifts in modern security is the move toward identity-centric security. Microsoft Zero Trust guidance emphasizes that identity is a foundational component of modern security and that protecting identities is one of the sort of core pillars of a Zero Trust strategy. So what does it actually mean? Right? It means we don't automatically trust users simply because they're connected to a corporate network. We don't automatically trust devices simply because they exist. Instead, every access decision becomes more intelligent, right? Who is the user? What device are they using? Where are they actually connecting from? And what are they actually trying to access? This is is there any sort of usual behavior as well? This is one reason why Microsoft Entra has become such a crucial component of modern Azure environments. Identity isn't simply about usernames and passwords anymore. It's actually about controlling access intelligently. Let's bring this back to our customer in this scenario, right? The client has approximately 500 users. They have an existing Active Directory environment, right? Some applications are actually on premises as well. Others are moving to Azure. Users are connecting from multiple locations as well. And the business is planning international growth. Immediately, we can identify some identity challenges. How will users access cloud resources? How will administrators be managed? Right? And how will privileged access be controlled? Think about how new employees will be onboarded as well, and how departing employees are going to be removed. And also, how do we maintain security without making life difficult for users? Notice what we're doing here, right? We're not actually starting with technology, we're starting with business requirements. The technology comes afterwards, and that's an important consulting mindset. One thing I've learned over the years is that organizations often try to design identity around technology. I believe it should be the opposite. Identity should be designed around people. Think about the different groups within our client specifically, right? We've got end users, we've got IT support staff, application owners, then we have security administrators. Let's not forget business leaders and another important one, external partners. Each group has different requirements. They have different, levels of access they need. And they introduce different levels of risk as well. Good identity architecture recognizes these differences, whereas bad architecture treats everyone the same. When everyone has the same level of access, security is going to suffer. When every permission requires excessive approval, productivity suffers. The goal here is balance. Security and usability together, not one at the expense of the other. If there is one concept I want viewers to remember from this episode, and it's this: least privilege. This simply means people should receive the minimum access necessary to perform their job. Not maximum access, not future access, not access they might need someday. Access they genuinely need today. And this sounds obvious, but in practice it can be surprisingly difficult. Imagine a user needs access to one application. Giving them access to every application is easier, but it's not safer. Imagine an administrator needs to manage a specific area of Azure. Making them a global admin might be easier, but it's certainly not safer. Microsoft's Zero Trust guidance repeatedly emphasizes limiting privileged access and reducing unnecessary permissions because privileged identities represent a significant target for attackers. Good consultants don't just ask, what access does this person need? They ask, what access can we safely avoid granting? That's a completely different mindset. Now, let's talk about the accounts that keep security teams awake at night. Privileged accounts. Every organization has them, right? The accounts that can make major changes, right? They grant the permissions, they can delete resources, right? And they have access to very, very sensitive systems. These identities deserve special attention because if attackers compromise a highly privileged account, the impact can be enormous. For our client, one recommendation would be to clearly separate administrative activities from normal user activities. This is something many organizations overlook. People browse email, access documents, attend meetings and perform administrative tasks using the same account. That increases risk. As an identity architect, I want privileged activities treated differently, right? I want stronger controls around them, much, much greater visibility. I actually want accountability as well. And most importantly, I want to reduce the number of permanently privileged identities wherever possible. Now let's talk about one of the most important capabilities in Microsoft Entra, conditional access. Microsoft describes conditional access as Microsoft's Zero Trust policy engine. It evaluates signals such as user identity, device information, location, applications, and risk before determining what level of access should be granted. The reason I love conditional access is because it helps move organizations away from sort of simplistic security models. Right? Historically, security was often black and white, allowed or blocked, yes or no. The modern world is more complicated, right? Not every user presents the same risk, and not every sign attempt is identical. Not every application should be treated the same way. Conditional access allows organizations to make smart decisions, right? Instead of asking, should this user have access? We actually start asking, under what conditions should this user have access? That is a much more mature approach to security. One challenge every consultant faces is balancing security and productivity. Because security teams often want more controls, right? Users often want fewer controls, and Somewhere in the middle sits the architect trying to make everyone happy. I always remind customers that security controls only work if users can realistically operate within them. If authentication becomes too frustrating, people look for shortcuts, and that's how shadow IT happens. If access processes become too slow, business units work around them. Good identity design doesn't just protect the organization, it actually enables the organization. One thing that Microsoft highlights in its conditional access guidance is the goal of protecting organizational assets while still allowing users to be productive wherever they work. I think that's exactly the right mindset. Security should support productivity, not fight against it. Eventually, every identity conversation reaches privileged access. And when it does, I often introduce customers to the concept of just-in-time access, or JIT. Think about a building, right? You leave every door unlocked 24 hours a day? Probably not. So why leave highly privileged access permanently enabled? This is where privileged identity management, or PIM, becomes really important. Instead of granting permanent access, people can actively, can activate elevated permissions when they actually need them. The principle is simple: reduce standing privilege, reduce exposure, reduce risk. Even without diving into technical implementation, customers immediately understand the business value. Less permanent access means fewer opportunities for misuse, fewer opportunities for mistakes, and fewer opportunities for any compromise. And that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. If you're enjoying the Azure Consultant Playbook series, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. What do you think is the biggest identity challenge organizations face today? Is it privilege management, user education, authentication, maybe conditional access, or simply understanding who has access to what? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And look, if you ever inherited an Azure environment with identity issues, I'd really love to hear that story. Now, let's move into the Consultant Copilot Corner. For this episode, let's look at how AI can assist with identity architecture. One of the biggest challenges consultants face is processing large amounts of information. Things like user roles, access requirements, privileged accounts, and administrative responsibilities, right? Business units, again, application dependencies. Identity projects can become quite complicated very, very quickly. This is where AI can be incredibly helpful. Imagine you've completed several workshops with that client, right? You've detailed notes about departments, responsibilities and systems, administrators and business processes. Instead of manually categorizing everything, you could ask Copilot to help identify access patterns. You could access it to group users based on responsibilities. You could ask it to identify potential privilege risks or highlight areas where access appears overly broad. You could even ask it to suggest a draft role, or draft role model. Notice the theme here: draft, suggest, highlight, recommend. No decision, because identity is an area where human judgment remains incredibly, incredibly important. For example, an AI-generated recommendation might technically satisfy access requirements, but it may not account for organizational politics. It may not understand the regulatory requirements, may not understand historical business processes, and it certainly doesn't own the risk. That's still the consultant's responsibility. One prompt I might use is something like this: review the following organizational roles and responsibilities. Identify potential access groups, privilege roles, separation of duty concerns, and areas where least privilege principles could be applied. That's a powerful starting point. But the consultant still validates every recommendation. AI helps you move faster. Expertise helps us move correctly. That's the theme of this entire series. By the end of our identity design phase, what do we want for our client? We want clear ownership. We want controlled access. We want to reduce privilege, and we want stronger security. We also need to think, we do want easy administration for them, right? And we want to support future growth. One of the most important things is we want an identity foundation that scales as the organization evolves. Because identity isn't something you implement once and you just forget. Identity grows alongside the business. Again, the better foundation, the easier that journey becomes. At this point, we've established our Azure foundation. We've designed our landing zone. We've built our identity strategy. We understand users and permissions, privileged access, security controls. Now, it's time to connect everything together. In the next episode, we're going to tackle Azure network architecture, right? We're going to explore how consultants think about connectivity, segmentation, hybrid environments, international growth, security boundaries, and scalable network design. And of course, we'll be putting AI to work again inside that Consultant Copilot Corner to see how AI-generated networking recommendations compare to real-world consulting experience. If you found this episode valuable, make sure you subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss episode 4 of the Azure Consultant Playbook, AI Edition. Right? If you know someone working with Azure, things like Microsoft Entra and cloud security, share this video with them. And before you go, answer this question in the comments. When you think about cloud security, what concerns you the most? Is it the identity? Is it data or devices, maybe applications, or something else entirely? Thanks for watching, and remember, in modern cloud environments, your network matters, your infrastructure matters, your governance matters, but your identity strategy often determines whether all those things remain secure or not.